How the driver didn't use the route she thought was best. She never owned a car and doesn't know how to drive. Children of I want to talk to your manager parents. What has been your most embarrassing experience? We traveled a lot when we were younger and would skip lines at the airport since we were kids. But now we were all in our early teens and my mom faked having a heart condition to skip the long line to get on the airplane. Flight attendants would have none of it and told us to go back to the end of the line. I still remember the smiles and looks of everyone there. My mom has been this person regularly throughout my life, but I do have one positive story with it. She and I went to eat at Portillo's when I was a teenager and we sat in the back of the restaurant where it was more private so we can eat in peace. About 10 minutes into our meal, 2 people come into the empty area and sit down 2 tables away from us. Turns out it was a manager and an employee that was getting written up. The manager was being a complete asshat towards the employee, criticizing and belittling them. My mom put down her food and walked over and started yelling at the manager for being such an asshole. She went on a rant about how rude and wrong it was of him to do this in front of the public 2 tables away from customers and really let him have it. She demanded the phone number of the manager above him and we left after she received it. I was pretty embarrassed at the time, but as I got older I realized that she was standing up for that employee and how wrong that manager really was. I'm not 100% sure what she did with that phone number because I lived with my dad and I had to go home after that meal. The number of cashiers my father demanded the manager fire because they were too slow, rang us up wrong, etc., including one they actually did. I'll never forget that girl taking her Home Depot apron off and walking away sobbing. To his credit, I guess? My dad seemed surprised that it actually worked, must have felt at least some level of guilt and never did it again. I work in a call center, and one of my coworkers spoke to a woman and explained a thing to her. I forget the exact thing, like, supposedly told her something would be covered and it wasn't or something along those lines. The woman calls back super angry and escalates to a manager. Manager reviews the call and finds a woman was, in fact, told the correct thing. She is still angry and insisting she was told the wrong thing. The manager replies, "Are you sure? Are you 100% sure? Because I am going to take you at your word, and if that is the case, the employee will lose his job. Someone is going to be fired over this if you are certain that's what they told you." The woman did not give a shit and insisted she was told the wrong thing. Some people are scum. The manager did not fire my coworker. She had proof he was correct. She just wanted to see how far this woman was willing to take her lie. I worked in a bakery located in a supermarket and was helping a woman buying pastries. She told me what she wanted. I put it in the box. After a few minutes, she looked into my face with a look of mounting horror and I freaked out, thinking there was a spider crawling on my face or something. I nervously said, "What?" As in, "What are you looking at that is terrifying you so badly?" And she immediately snapped into angry mode. "What? That's how you talk to customers? What?" And she immediately flounced off and returned with the store manager, who technically wasn't my boss as I worked for the bakery. She brought him over to me and demanded that he fire me, because, according to her, I didn't even greet her when she came in, just stood there and said what? I showed him her half-filled box of pastries and explained the situation, and of course, she threw a fit saying they weren't hers, so the manager politely told her that I would be dealt with to calm her down. Nothing ever came of it because he could see she was clearly crazy or trying to pull a scam. Right, so my mom and me went shopping, and she dropped a melon on the way out. She then claimed it was bruised and demanded a full refund. When she refused, she shouted at customer service and demanded the manager. I just sat there with a kill me now expression on my face. After, one of the customer service employees gave me a chocolate bar, so 7 years me was happy. I might be late, but my dad once asked the guy at the Verizon wireless store to give him his own social security number because he asked for my dad's. My dad walked out afterward with some stranger's SS number on a post-it. I was a silent bystander because I really wanted my first phone. At a family friend's cookout, not a restaurant, I bit into a burger that had ice in it. I was about 12. I showed my dad and he silently threw it in the trash. He told me to eat some chips and coleslaw instead, but don't make a big deal out of it. As an adult, I enjoy rare steaks, but I can't bring myself to order a burger rare. Guess I made a big deal out of it anyway. I was with my parents on vacation and the hotel put charges on the bill by accident. My mom marched to the front desk and demanded to see the manager. There was a long line, but she cut right in front of it. The manager wasn't very helpful, probably because she was rude. So my mom went to all the other customers in line and told them that the hotel was a scam and they were ripping us off with fake charges. She made a scene. The hotel called the police and we were escorted off the premises by actual cops. I died inside. I was at the Tropicana. 22-year-old kids, with my girlfriend, Buddy, and his girlfriend, sharing a double queen room. Wake up after first night, ants on my toothbrush. I called the front desk, and they said they were going to send someone up. Wait, an hour goes by, and we are still waiting. I call again, still polite, but now very firm. This is unacceptable, and we need this resolved in the hour. They sent a bellhop to upgrade us to a penthouse suite. The people who are helping you want to help. The customer just needs to let them. About once a month my dad gets drunk and calls various customer service centers demanding stuff. Once he finally gets off the phone, frequently 45 plus minutes later, he spends the next few days telling us all about how he slew the customer service dragon and boy people sure don't appreciate their customers nowadays blah blah blah. No duh, Dad, you're being an asshole, no one appreciates that. If you've worked for DirecTV customer service anytime since 1996, I apologize on behalf of my dad. My father consistently returns food to grocery stores when he is unsatisfied with the quality. The worst is when he returns the 2 pounds bricks of cheddar cheese because they went moldy before they should have. Before Value Village, Savers in the States I think, changed policies, she would cut tags to get discounts since the cashiers would basically make up whatever price they thought it would be, on the spot. If they highballed it, she would get a manager involved and I hated that. When I was a young child on a long-distance flight my mother let me and my brother sleep on the floor. For safety reasons, the flight attendants told my mother that we were not allowed to sleep on the floor. She started to argue with the flight attendants who then turned to the pilots. The pilots threatened to turn the plane around unless we get up from the floor but she continued to argue. The pilots announced they were about to turn around because of my mother, so all the passengers got pissed. Eventually, she caved in when she had all passengers and flight crew on a Boeing 747 against her. Not the child, but I think this fits. I had this awful annoying a terrible neighbor who, because I'm a giant sucker, I was kind to. She asked me to come with her to dinner because it was her birthday, and I knew I was the only person on the planet who would go with her and gosh darn it it's her birthday how could I say no? So she and I went and we brought our kids, all girls, 1 mine, 2 hers. She makes her oldest do her math homework right there at the table. When the child asks her for help, mind you this is like 3rd grade math, the mom says it's too hard. I end up helping. The waiter is just fine. He comes by and takes our orders. She is already acting weird but she always acted weird so I didn't think much of it. A waiter comes by again and asks if we need anything. She dismisses him and waves him off and tells him no. Then like 30 seconds later turns to me and is like can you believe how awful the waiter is? He won't even refill my drink. And just goes on about all these issues that literally don't exist. I'm like he just asked if you needed anything she cuts me off I'm going to talk to the manager. Oh, God. She talks to the manager like this is the worst experience she's ever had in the history of her miserable existence. I'm in shock, her kids have their heads down. Mine is oblivious, lol. The manager gives her half of the meal. Oh and the kicker? That's my half so you only need to pay the rest. Thanks. I left a big tip and a note on my receipt telling them the waiter was great and apologizing for the complaints that were totally not warranted. It was the second most embarrassing restaurant experience of my life. When my daughter was young, like 1 year old, I was out to dinner with my family and, then, husband. Normally she was super well behaved, but for some reason, she started to cry. And she wouldn't stop. I tried to soothe her but it wasn't working. I told my husband she needed to be taken outside, but he refused because the food was being served. So already I'm embarrassed because now I'm that mom with the crying kid ruining the restaurant for everyone. Plus this is right in front of my family especially my dad who I look up to and try to model as a parent. I couldn't just up and grab her at that moment because the food really was being served and I would have knocked down a waiter. But as the waiters left, my husband suddenly slammed his hand over our daughter's mouth and nose and rumbled at her through gritted teeth to shut up. His arm was super tense, as was his voice, and it was like he was doing all he could to not crush her head like a grape. My eyes went wide, I grabbed her, and took her outside. Never did find out what was wrong with her since she was fed, clean, and all that. But I did see a dark side of my husband, and so did my father. My husband didn't even come out to relieve me until he had completely finished with his food. She had calmed down by then, though, so I brought her back inside. I didn't want to leave her alone with him anyway. By the time I was able to eat, my own food had gone cold. Super embarrassing and also terrifying. My mom demanded to see a cafe's hygiene certificate when she saw an employee go from cutting cake in the kitchen to handling money at the till, even though the real problem is going the other way. My mother is a nightmare with customer service. Even with the fact that her daughter works in customer service and deals with people like her on the daily. So many incidents stick out in my mind, but one that really embarrassed me as we were at Walmart. The stalker was struggling and dropped their price scanner thing on the ground. I was going to go help her gather her things she was struggling with when my mom came out like a bat out of hell and yelled, "You know you should pick that up, people could trip," and then she darted off with the cart. I was so embarrassed I just walked away in shame, and when I pointed it out to my mom, the girl dropped it on accident. She said, well, she should be more careful. My mom used to run restaurants. My stepfather used to be a chef in high-end restaurants and is the kind of guy who expects to be treated better than he is currently being treated, regardless of whatever that treatment is. They are not fun to go out to eat with. The most embarrassing experience is actually their most embarrassing experience, one where I embarrass them. My wife and I pride ourselves on being a relief table when we go out to eat. Both of us have been servers, and there's always the counterpoint to the difficult table, that's us. Barring horrible service or bad food, we are super easy customers, tip well, and try to have a good time with our server. Furthermore, we just treat people nicely. So you can imagine our disdain when my parents act like they're fucking royalty at dinner service. My wife and I went out to dinner with them. They were being particularly tough. My mom was acting like she was Gordon Ramsay analyzing the business, critiquing everything down to the amount of bubbles in her seltzer. Looks like it's time to change the CO2. My stepdad was getting more and more heated over stupid things like the amount of ice in his drink and how the waitress didn't top off his water, that he was barely sipping on, fast enough. It came to a head when my stepfather ordered a steak medium well. It came back medium well, and for some reason, he changed his mind that he wanted it medium rare while it was cooking, and they didn't read his mind, so he gave attitude, as did my mom. They jumped really quickly to demanding free stuff. I'm an adult and this may be the first time they realized this. I interrupted in front of the server and said something like, "Really? This is what you're doing? That's what you ordered?" I turned to the server and said, "We do not need anything comped." I then pulled out my wallet and handed her my card and said, "This is for the bill. We'll happily wrap up with what we have here. I'm very sorry for their behavior, you're doing great." Then the line that stung them so deep they still bring it up years later. I was taught to treat people nicely, a lesson that seems to be forgotten. "Thank you." They turned red, the server walked away, I looked down and cut my steak, and didn't say a word. They were so flabbergasted that the meal was virtually silent except me asking my stepfather how his steak was a few minutes later. I signed the check, gave a big tip, and we walked out and said goodbye. They've been nicer to servers each time that we've gone out since. My dad just loved to argue, and he loved a deal. We were shopping in a department store, and I found a pair of pants I was mildly interested in. The pants were tagged at, let's say, $40, and the sign on the rack was all pants $25. I was mildly interested. I asked the sales clerk if they had them in my size. The clerk said, "Those aren't supposed to be on that rack." My dad lost his shit and insisted on getting the pants for $25, and started asking for a courtesy discount on top of that. Escalated to the floor manager and the store manager. Meanwhile, I didn't want the pants. They were okay pants, I guess, nothing awesome, I just didn't care very much about them. I was more than happy to move on. I told my dad I didn't want the pants. By then he didn't care about what I wanted, he wanted the pants at a better price. Eventually, after like an hour of arguing, the store manager said, "We're not giving you the pants at that price. Take them or leave them at $40. So we left them. Which suited me just fine, because I didn't want the pants. One time I was in a record store with my dad. He bought a record that was 19,99 euros. He paid using a €20 bill. The clerk took the money and put it in the register and gave my dad the CD in a plastic bag. I started walking off when I noticed my dad wasn't moving. As I turn around, I hear him say to the record store clerk, "You still have to give me my cent back." The clerk replies that they don't return 1 or 2 cents because they don't accept them and as such don't have them in the store. My dad replies by saying that is judicially impossible and asks for the manager. To make a long story short, one of the clerks gave my dad a cent from his own wallet. I don't like going to restaurants with her. She thinks that because she worked as a waitress for a year 35 years ago, it gives her the right to act like a complete asshole to them. She also thinks not tipping them will encourage them to get their act together. Joke's on you, Mom. I always find our server after seated, give them a $20 and apologize in advance for your poor behavior. Yes, she knows what I think of it. She doesn't care. She believes she's sticking to her principles, and that tipping poor service, read, never had good service, something will always be wrong, will encourage their laziness. It's not going to stop. If you wait on her, I am very sorry. When I was 6, my mom took my brothers and me out to Golden Corral for dinner. She went up to the buffet, got a steak, and came back to the table. She's an avid A1 steak sauce fan and cannot, I repeat, cannot eat steak without it. She poured out the A1 onto her plate, tasted it, and was instantly horrified. She proceeded to pour out the Golden Corral steak sauce right next to the A1 and it matched perfectly. Outraged, she called over a waitress and eventually the manager, showing them her little experiment and how she exposed the great steak sauce fraud of '06. My brothers and I were scarred for the rest of our lives. I still have nightmares about it. My mom asked me to call her a taxi via an app. She ended up calling me multiple times complaining about how the driver didn't use the route she thought was best. She never owned a car and doesn't know how to drive, even though the guy just used the best possible route the navigator suggested. She ended up getting out halfway and using the subway. The driver proceeded to call me in tears, completely shocked, unsure of what he did so wrong, and apologizing. I felt like total shit. I never called her a cab again. My mom needed to return some shirts at the mall because they didn't fit right. It was past the allotted time that she had to return them, so the employee said that there wasn't anything she could do. My mom started screaming at this girl who was probably about 16 or 17, calling her names and demanding to speak to the manager. When the manager told my mom that they couldn't do anything and that the return policy was on the receipt, my mom threw a fit and knocked over a display that was next to the register and stormed out of the store. I was probably 6 or 7 at the time and I was mortified. I apologized for her behavior and picked up what I could before she started calling for me to follow her. The manager was super sweet to me though and told me that I was a good kid and to stick up to my mom when I could get away with it. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.